Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu's first meeting sparks a sudden and sweet connection. There is a photograph that circulated among Turkish entertainment fan communities sometime during the production of Fazilet Hanım v. Kızları. It is not a dramatic photograph. Nothing scandalous is happening in it. Two people are standing near a set, between takes, and one of them is saying something that is making the other one laugh. A real laugh. Not the polished, camera-ready smile that both of these people had spent years perfecting for press appearances and promotional events. A genuine, unguarded, caught-off-guard laugh. The photograph spread quietly at first, then faster, and the comment sections underneath it filled with people writing some version of the same thing in a dozen different languages. Something is happening there. They were not wrong. But what actually happened, and how it happened, and why it unfolded the way it did, is a story that is far more layered than any photograph can capture. Because the connection between Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu did not begin with a single moment. It began with two people, each carrying the private weight of their own complicated histories, each having built careful walls around the parts of themselves that mattered most, arriving at the same place at the same time and slowly, almost accidentally, dismantling those walls together. This is that story. And it starts, like most real stories do, not at the beginning of the romance, but long before it. With who these two people were before they ever met. Because you cannot understand what they found in each other without understanding what they had each been looking for, and what they had each been through. And why finding it in the middle of a television production was both the most unlikely and the most perfect possible outcome. Barış Arduç was born in Istanbul in 1989. He grew up in a city that is simultaneously ancient and furiously modern, a city that has always understood the performance of identity, the layering of surfaces, the complexity of being seen. Istanbul shapes its people in specific ways. It makes them perceptive. It makes them a little guarded. It gives them an eye for the difference between what something looks like and what it actually is. Barış carried all of that with him into his professional life. He entered the entertainment industry through the path that most Turkish actors of his generation followed, early television roles that built visibility, gradually more substantial parts, a slow accumulation of credibility that went beyond looks. Because Barış was always more than a face. Colleagues and directors who worked with him in his early career consistently described the same quality. He listens. When a scene is happening, he is actually present in it. He is not waiting for his line. He is hearing the other person. That quality, genuine listening, is rarer in performance than most people outside the industry understand. And it is the kind of thing that audiences feel without being able to name. They watch someone like Barış and they believe him, even when the material is not exceptional, even when the writing gives him little to work with, because there is something underneath the performance that feels true. By his mid-20s, Barış had established himself as one of the more bankable young actors in Turkish television. He was recognizable. He had a dedicated fan base. He did the press obligations and the photo shoots and the interviews. But people who knew him personally during this period described someone who found the public-facing part of his career somewhat exhausting. Not in a bitter way. Just in the way that intensely private people often find exposure tiring. He was good at it. It did not come naturally. In his personal life, he was selective. Not secretive, but selective. He did not offer himself up to public scrutiny in the way that some celebrities of his generation had learned to do as a career strategy. He kept his circle small. He valued depth over breadth in relationships. And he had, by the time he was in his late 20s, developed a very clear sense of what he did not want, even if what he did want was harder to articulate. Now turn the lens to Elçin Sangu. Born in 1985 in Istanbul, Elçin had a head start on Barış in terms of industry experience. She had been part of the entertainment world long enough to understand it from the inside, its rhythms and its cruelties, its capacity for elevation and its equal capacity for erosion. She was, by the time she was in her early 30s, one of the most recognized actresses in Turkish drama. Not just recognized. Respected. The distinction matters. Elçin had spent her career building something more durable than fame. She had developed a reputation for taking her work seriously, for bringing genuine craft to her performances, for caring about the material she chose and how she inhabited it. Directors who worked with her talked about her preparation, her specificity, the way she would ask questions in rehearsal that showed she had been thinking about her character's interior life in ways that went beyond what the script required. She was also, by any measure, someone who had been through a great deal personally in the public eye. Her relationships, when they had existed, had attracted the kind of attention that the Turkish entertainment press specializes in. There had been visible moments, analyzed photographs, breathless tabloid coverage of breakups that she experienced while millions of people were watching. And she had navigated all of it with a composure that, to outside observers, sometimes looked like coldness, but was actually something else. It was self-preservation. It was the careful maintenance of an inner life that she refused to let become content. By 2017, when Fazilet Hanım v. Kızılari began production, Elçin was in a place that many people who have survived a great deal of public scrutiny arrive at eventually. A kind of settled clarity. She knew who she was. She knew what she valued. She knew the difference between what she wanted and what she was willing to settle for. And she was not, by her own admission in interviews from that period, actively looking for anything new in her personal life. She was focused on the work. So was he. And the work was Fazilet Hanım v. Kızılari, a production that would turn out to be significant not just for their careers, but, quietly and unexpectedly, for the rest of their lives. The series centered on a family drama with multiple intersecting storylines, the kind of multi-character ensemble production that requires its cast members to spend long hours together, to develop genuine chemistry both on screen and off, to trust each other enough to be emotionally vulnerable in front of cameras and crew and each other. The production schedule was demanding. The material required emotional investment. And the environment, as anyone who has worked in long-form television production will tell you, creates a peculiar kind of intimacy between the people inside it. Film and television sets are, in many ways, sealed worlds. The hours are long and strange. The emotional register is heightened because the work demands it. You are spending more time with your coworkers than you are spending with anyone in your regular life. And you are doing so while repeatedly accessing your own emotional interior, which is what acting requires. It is not a normal professional environment, and it does not produce normal professional relationships. What it can produce, and what it sometimes does produce, is the kind of unexpected connection that happens when two people are stripped of their usual defenses by the demands of the work itself. This is the context in which Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu first occupied the same space. Not a party. Not a social event where people perform their public selves. A set. A place where the performance is the job, and the person underneath the performance is necessarily more visible. The early days of production were, by all accounts, straightforwardly professional. Both of them arrived with their work ethic intact and their personal lives private. Cast members from the series have spoken in interviews about the atmosphere on set during that period, describing it as collaborative, warm, efficient. The production had a good energy. People were showing up ready to work. And then, somewhere in the accumulated hours of that work, something began to shift between the two leads. It is difficult to pinpoint because neither Barış nor Elçin have ever given a single definitive account of exactly when or how it started, which is consistent with who they both are. They are not people who perform their private lives for public consumption. But what has emerged from various interviews, from observations by people who were present, and from the small, telling details that both of them have occasionally let slip, is a picture of a connection that grew from professional respect into something much more personal through a process that was neither dramatic nor planned. It started with listening. This is the word that keeps appearing in accounts of the early dynamic between them. Barış listens in a way that is unusual. Elçin, who had spent years being looked at rather than heard, responded to this in a way she did not entirely anticipate. There is a difference between being seen and being watched, between being heard and being listened to, and the difference, when you encounter it after a long time without it, can be disorienting in the best possible way. There is a specific moment that several people connected to the production have referenced, though the details are somewhat vague because the people involved have been appropriately discreet. It involves a scene that required significant emotional investment from both lead actors. One of those sequences that, when it works, crosses the line between performance and something more genuinely felt. And by multiple accounts, something in the execution of that scene produced a moment between Barış and Elçin that the people watching from behind the monitor noticed. A stillness between them after the director called cut. A beat that lasted slightly longer than it needed to. Nobody said anything. That is the thing about these moments on set. Everyone sees them. Nobody narrates them out loud. But everyone remembers them. What followed was a gradual deepening that proceeded at the pace of both people involved, which is to say it proceeded slowly and carefully. Barış, by temperament, does not rush toward things that matter to him. He approaches significance with caution. Not out of fear exactly, but out of a kind of respect for whatever the thing is. An instinct that important things deserve time. Elçin, who had her own reasons for caution, matched this pace in a way that felt, to people observing from close quarters, like an unconscious synchronization. They were not strategizing. They were just both, independently, operating at the same speed. And that shared rhythm became part of the foundation. They started spending time together outside of filming obligations. Not in visible ways. Not in ways that would generate photographs or fuel the entertainment press. Just time. The quiet, low-stakes accumulation of hours that is the real architecture of any genuine connection. Coffee between takes. Conversations that started about the work and then moved somewhere else. The gradual discovery of the particular way another person thinks, the things they find funny, the things they take seriously, the moments when their guard comes down. Colleagues describe the shift as something you registered more than observed. The texture of the air between them changed. They moved around each other differently. There was an ease that had not been there at the beginning. And there was also, and this is the detail that most people noticed, a protectiveness. Neither of them was drawing attention to whatever was developing. But both of them seemed, instinctively, to be handling it carefully. This protectiveness makes complete sense in context. Both of them understood what public attention does to something fragile. Elçin in particular had experienced the damage that premature exposure can cause. When a relationship becomes public before it has had time to become solid, the public narrative can overwhelm the private reality. The story that gets told about the relationship starts to crowd out the relationship itself. Both of them, from different experiences, had learned this lesson. And so whatever was growing between them was kept, for as long as possible, away from the light. Meanwhile, in the fan communities that had been following both of them for years, something was being noticed anyway. The Turkish celebrity fan ecosystem is remarkably sophisticated. Online communities had developed their own analytical frameworks for reading behind-the-scenes footage, press appearances, and photographs. Fan accounts with tens of thousands of followers began cataloging interactions between Barış and Elçin that, individually, might have meant nothing but collectively were building a picture. The way he angled toward her in group photographs. The way she would reference something he had said in interviews without naming him. The specific quality of their laughter when they were photographed together at events. Fan compilation videos began appearing. Forum threads ran to hundreds of pages. The community divided, as fan communities always do, between those who were convinced something was real and those who insisted they were projecting. The debates were passionate and detailed and, in retrospect, entirely correct on the side of those who believe something was happening. There is something remarkable about this phenomenon. The idea that millions of people, none of whom know these two individuals personally, can read the emotional subtext of their interactions with enough accuracy to arrive at a correct conclusion before any confirmation exists. It speaks to something about how humans read each other, how we are wired to detect genuine connection versus performed connection, how even through a screen and across a language barrier and without any explicit information, the thing that is real tends to be visible. The fans saw it. They saw it before it was confirmed. Some of them, in the archival record of those forum threads, described exactly what they were seeing in language that turned out to be almost precisely accurate. Back on set, the production of Fazilet Hanım v. Kızları was generating its own cultural moment. The series was drawing significant viewership. The performances of the two leads were being discussed with genuine enthusiasm. Critics noted the unusual quality of the chemistry between Barış and Elçin on screen, describing it in terms that went beyond the usual complimentary language applied to co-stars. Words like real and rare kept appearing. Viewers who had no idea what was happening between them off-camera were nonetheless responding to something they could sense in the performances. This is the paradox at the center of this story. The very thing that was producing the on-screen chemistry that audiences were responding to was the off-screen reality that both actors were working to keep private. The authenticity that viewers were watching was being generated by something authentic. The performance was being fed by something true. Barış, in an interview from this period that now reads as remarkably candid in retrospect, spoke about what he looks for in genuine human connection. The journalist had asked the question in a general way, not in reference to any specific person. And Barış answered in a way that was thoughtful and specific and, to anyone reading it now with context, clearly personal. He talked about ease. Not the initial electricity of attraction, though he acknowledged that has its place. But the deeper ease of being with someone in whose company you do not have to perform. Where you can be quiet and have that be enough. Where the absence of noise between two people does not feel like emptiness, but like something comfortable and rare. He was not describing a hypothetical. He was describing something he had already found. Elçin, in her own interviews from around the same period, covered similar territory from a different angle. She spoke about privacy as something that requires active protection, not just passive maintenance. About the discipline of keeping certain things sacred by keeping them invisible. She talked about trust as the foundation of anything real, and about how rare it is to encounter someone who understands instinctively, without negotiation, where the boundaries are. She was, as Barış was in his interview, speaking in the abstract. But the specificity of her language gave her away to anyone paying close enough attention. Two people, in separate interview chairs, describing each other in the language of careful abstraction. It is one of the more quietly moving things about this story. The public confirmation of their relationship came in the way that everything involving these two people had come. Gradually. Without announcement. Through the accumulating weight of visibility that eventually becomes undeniable. There was no press release. There was no strategic reveal. There was just a growing presence in each other's lives that eventually stopped being invisible. When it became public knowledge, the response from the fan communities who had been following both of them was immediate and, notably, joyful. This is worth examining because it is not the universal reaction to celebrity couples becoming public. Sometimes audiences feel possessive. Sometimes the merging of two beloved figures into a unit creates a loss, a sense that something individual has been given away. But with Barış and Elçin, the reaction was different. People were happy for them. Genuinely, warmly happy. In a way that felt less like fan behavior and more like the response you have when something that was clearly meant to happen finally does. Part of this is attributable to the individual character of both people. Barış and Elçin are not celebrities who provoke complicated feelings in their audiences. They are both, separately, figures who are liked for reasons that go beyond surface. Their professional reputations, their evident seriousness about their work, their consistent dignity in the face of public scrutiny. These things had built a particular kind of regard in their audiences. And so when they were together, the combined regard translated into something like collective goodwill. But there is also something specific to the nature of how their connection began. The fact that it started on a set. That it grew from professional respect. That it was built in the context of work that both of them cared deeply about. This origin gave it a quality that people could sense and respond to. It did not feel like a convenience. It did not feel like a strategy. It felt like a genuine accident, the kind that happens when two people who are both fully present in what they are doing happen to be present in it together. The relationship deepened and became, over the following months, increasingly visible in the quiet ways that both of them preferred. They were photographed together at events. They appeared in each other's social media periphery in the way that couples do when they have stopped actively hiding, but have not yet started actively displaying. The fan communities that had been watching from the beginning documented every detail with the dedicated attention of people who felt that they had a stake in the story. And in a way, they did. This is one of the more interesting aspects of the phenomenon. The millions of people who had been following both Barış and Elçin separately, who had invested emotional energy in their careers and their public personas over years or decades, experienced the formation of this couple as something that happened to them too. Not in a possessive way. In the way that any story you have been following for a long time produces a kind of investment that makes the resolution feel personal. They got married in 2018. The wedding was handled with the same intentional understatement that had characterized everything before it. It was not a media event. It was a personal one. The images that circulated afterward showed two people who looked, above everything else, like they were exactly where they wanted to be. Elçin in particular looked different in those photographs than she had looked in years of public-facing appearances. Less composed in the careful, managed way that long-term public figures learn. More simply, openly happy. It was the face of someone who had stopped performing and was just feeling. Barış looked the same way. Settled. Certain. Not in a grandiose way, but in the quiet way of someone who has found what they were looking for and recognized it clearly. In interviews after the wedding, both of them spoke about their relationship with a warmth that was notably free of performance. There is a particular mode that celebrities often adopt when discussing their personal relationships in public, a kind of calculated openness that shares enough to seem transparent while actually protecting everything that matters. Barış and Elçin did not do this. When they talked about each other, it was in the language of people speaking from an interior truth rather than constructing a public narrative. Barış talked about laughter. About how Elçin makes him laugh in ways that are specific to her, not the social laugh of people performing ease with each other, but the involuntary laugh of someone who has been genuinely surprised by another person's mind. He talked about how rare that is. How much it matters. Elçin talked about security. About the particular quality of being with someone whose character you trust completely, not just their intentions, but their nature. She used the word home in a way that was clearly not metaphorical. She was describing a feeling, and the feeling was legible in how she described it. These are not the testimonials of people performing happiness for a public audience. These are the words of two people who found something real and know that they found it. Their daughter Alara was born in November 2021. The announcement, when it came, was in keeping with everything that had preceded it. Gentle. Warm. Without spectacle. A simple sharing of something enormous. And the response from the fan communities who had followed the story from its ambiguous beginning, through its gradual confirmation, through the marriage and the years of a shared life, was overwhelming in its sincerity. These were people who felt that they had been part of a story. And in the strange, mediated way that public figures and their audiences sometimes genuinely share experience, they had been. The photograph from that early production period, the one of Elçin laughing at something Barış had said, became something different once the full story was known. It had started as a piece of evidence, a small data point in the fan community's ongoing analysis of what might or might not be happening between two co-stars. It became, in retrospect, a document. A record of a specific moment in the early life of something that turned out to be real and lasting and important. Looking at it now, you can see what the comment section saw immediately. Not the surface of two attractive people in a professional setting, but the texture of the moment. The way she is genuinely surprised by her own laugh. The way he is watching her laugh with an expression that is also unguarded, that is also more present than professional circumstance requires. Something is happening there. It was. And what the story of Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu ultimately offers, beyond the pleasure of a good romantic narrative and the satisfaction of watching two people find each other, is a kind of template. Not for celebrity relationships, but for connection in general. For what it looks like when two people who are both mature enough to know what they need, and careful enough to protect what matters, and present enough in their work to be genuinely open to surprise, end up in the same space. It does not look like the compressed, dramatic arc of a television romance. It does not begin with a grand gesture or resolve in a single defining scene. It looks like the slow accumulation of small moments. A genuine laugh. A real conversation. The specific ease of a silence that does not need to be filled. The gradual recognition of someone whose character you can trust. It looks like a set between takes. And it looks like two people who were both trying to do good work and ended up finding something better. Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu have been, by every visible measure, one of the most quietly solid partnerships in Turkish public life. No manufactured drama. No strategic visibility. Just two people who found each other in the middle of their work, took their time with what they found, and built something real out of it. The work began it. The patience sustained it. And the foundation they built in those early, careful, protected months on a set in Istanbul has held everything that came after. In the end, the most remarkable thing about this story is how unremarkable the core of it is. A man who listens and a woman who needed to be heard. A space created by shared work, where both of them could be more than their public selves. A connection that was recognized before it was confirmed, by millions of people who had never met either of them but could tell, from a photograph of a genuine laugh, that something true was happening. Something was. And it still is. What do you think? Let us know in the comments.